Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film Hard Eyes. What a great start to the year for horror. I mean, besides Wolfman, which I was really looking forward to and I thought was pretty disappointing, not bad at all, but just not on the level I was hoping it would be given the track record of the director. But other than that, it's been a very good year for horror so far. I'm very pleased about the quality of horror movies that have come out, and considering we are still in the worst part of the year for movies, and normally horror this time of year sucks. If you look at January, February horror movies, they're usually the worst horror movies of the whole year. And maybe Wolfman wasn't great, but it wasn't even that bad. But considering we're still in that part of the year, we've had two horror movies that I had a blast with. The first one is Companion, which I could rave about for an hour. It's such a fun and smart movie that takes you on this really wild ride. It's very creative and fun and exciting. I love that movie a lot. Probably still my favorite movie so far of the year. It's still early, but so far that's my favorite. And now we have Hard Eyes, which I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard about this movie, I thought it was going to be terrible. I thought it was gonna be kind of like an early 2000s or 2010s, lame slasher film. We've had so many, big, huge, popular slashers over the years, like Halloween. This was giving more the vibe of My Bloody Valentine 3D, which, if you haven't heard of it, wasn't it wasn't a very big slasher. But this movie, Hard Eyes, I didn't think it was going to be that good. I thought even the trailer didn't totally convince me. I was really, I should go see it, and I was really skeptical about whether I should or not. But I did see that Christopher Landon was attached as a writer, and if you don't know who Christopher Landon is, he did the Happy Death Day movies, he did this movie Freak, and this movie coming out later this year called Drop, which looks pretty fun. I just think he's a very good filmmaker. I mean, his previous stuff, he did a bunch of stuff in the past which wasn't totally well rated or any of that stuff, but, he's kind of found his groove. I think he's really good at doing these sort of horror comedies, and they're good, surprises. They're these movies that you wouldn't expect to be good, but they're actually really fun. I remember Happy Death Day, when that came out, I thought that looked really dumb, and I was like, this doesn't look good. But I saw it, and I was like, that was a lot of fun. And the sequel, I mean, I don't think people really love the sequel that much. I'm probably in the unpopular opinion that it might actually be better than the first one. I really like that one. And then Freaky, I mean, I didn't love Freaky or anything, but I thought it was a good time. And as I said, Drop looks fun, so I'll be seeing that for sure. But additionally, I saw that reviews came out for Hard Eyes, and they were surprisingly positive. Not just decent either, but actually really solid. I believe the critic score is around an 80% right now, which means about 8 out of 10 people liked it, so definitely nothing to scoff at. I mean, that's pretty impressive, especially for horror, which, horror can go vary a lot, but this kind of horror, especially with, much more silly kind of stuff going on, that can go either way, really. I mean, M3gan or Megan, however you want to call it, that was kind of a similar type of movie to this, where it was just going full camp and silliness, and that was also a big critical hit and a box office success, so, that kind of made me think, oh, maybe Hard Eyes is kind of like that. And anyway, though, I went into this movie still with pretty low expectations because I had no idea what I was really getting into. It's sometimes with a movie, you just go in and you're like, I don't even really know what to expect from this, but I'm just going to hope it's a good time. But I immediately realized by the opening scene alone that this was going to be pure campiness. And I said that word earlier, and I've said this before on a lot of other episodes, but it feels like horror is going a lot into campiness lately. Which I like because, a lot of times horror takes itself so seriously, and I think it's just fun when it really just lets loose and goes for the wackiness and maybe the silliness that, you can just sit back and have a good time with and laugh at it while you're being scared. I find those to be very fun, and honestly, they're some of the easier horror movies to get into as well. They kind of attract a larger audience, because you have a lot of people who don't really want to see horror, and I used to not want to see horror because I was like, this just looks too scary, it doesn't look totally for me, but, you see some really fun ones out there, and they're really enjoyable, and I think they can attract a lot of people. Get Out was a great one at that. It had comedy, it had horror, it had all these things, but it just really pleased a lot of different people. And I do really like campiness in horror movies. It just makes for a fun time where you can just laugh at what's happening because the movie knows it's ridiculous, and therefore you can acknowledge that it's ridiculous too. But the truth is that none of that matters if you don't deliver on these basic things like strong characters, a well thought out story, and of course, bloody deaths. Thankfully, Hard Eyes checks all those boxes. I was pretty surprised though by how much I ended up caring about the characters. And considering they're not like all that original and go through some pretty expected tropes for this kind of movie, it's just really because of the actors and their chemistry that I was able to connect very quickly to them and want to see them survive. And that's really important. I think horror movies especially really need good characters because if you want to see them survive, everything that happens to them is all that much scarier and more intense to watch. Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding are both very charming and have great chemistry. They really feel taken out of a rom-com and inserted into this slasher movie, which I'm a big fan of. I really love that kind of feel to it because that's kind of what this movie's going for. It is going for some rom-com stuff and kind of mixes with this slasher. And I think the casting there really works and their chemistry just really adds to the whole thing. And what I kind of have to credit this movie for is actually leaning pretty hard into the rom-com elements. Some may find it to be a bit much and maybe a bit too on the nose, but I admired how self-aware it was with the tropes, and similar to a movie like Scream, which is known for being meta and known for kind of using general horror tropes to kind of make a point, this movie uses a lot of those tired rom-com tropes to its advantage throughout the story and maybe uses them to twist them on their head a little bit. And I thought that was really cool. And I think similar to Companion even, this movie's also taking like the romance genre and just really trying to do something creative with it and kind of blend it with horror. And we don't really see a lot of romance horror movies out there. Like this is one of them and Companion's one of them. It's just really cool to see. But I think a lot of what I mentioned is due to a good script and a story that is a lot of fun. If you like more meta horror movies like Scream or Happy Death Day, you'll likely enjoy this too, and I think you'll have a really good time with it. It's also well directed by Josh Rubin. He does a good job getting the tone right and not letting things get too silly for its own good. And that's really important because this movie is very silly. Like, full warning, it goes for some really silly, just kind of stupid stuff, but it does it in a way where it doesn't feel stupid. It just feels like fun. And that's really hard to get right. It's also very well edited, which goes a long way, especially in a horror movie. I actually do believe this movie has the same editor as Companion, which I don't think a lot of people are really going to notice, but I think it's just a really cool thing. Both of these movies are very well edited, and I think that's just really good in getting the pace right, because a lot of horror movies, you have the standard, like, character walking through, an empty room with some silence, and you're just like, alright, where's the jump scare? Like, this movie actually has some really nice editing that kind of leads you to, in a few places, maybe go like, what's going to happen here? So that was really cool. And then there are the kills, of course, which I mentioned, some bloody kills. Without getting into specifics, this has a lot of bloody good death scenes. It delivers on the slasher stuff you want, so that was satisfying. If you go into a slasher movie, you expect this kind of stuff, and, if you're going for the rom-comness, you're also going to get some slasher in here. But I think that stuff was really cool. The opening scene in particular was a lot of fun, and also probably one of the more bloody scenes in the movie, but if you go in for that stuff, you get pretty nice scene out of that. And I thought the Valentine's Day Killer was actually a really cool villain. I mean, not that you really learn much about who this guy is or what the real point is. I mean, you get a little bit, but not like a ton. But basically the design is very basic for this killer, but there are these hard eyes, roll credits, but there are these hard eyes sort of on the costume that glow in the dark, and it made for some cool shots. I thought that was really a really neat idea. Kind of makes him almost a little scarier when it's in the complete darkness and you just see these eyes beaming and you're sort of walking towards people. I was that was really cool. I will say though, this movie isn't scary. It has a few jump scares and moments where characters walk around quietly and stuff, but I didn't find any of it to be all that spooky or get me too tense. Honestly, I mean, maybe that's because of the tone this movie was going for and so much comedy out of it, which I think I'll get to in a minute, but it just didn't really feel scary. Sometimes even in Scream, with all the comedy going on, and even in Companion, with all the comedy going on, it still finds ways to be tense and really, on the edge of your seat. This movie, I wasn't really on the edge of my seat, but if you're going into this movie specifically because you're expecting or wanting to be scared, you don't really get that. Personally, I didn't really mind because I was just so entertained and having a lot of fun with the movie, so I wasn't really thinking about the fact that, like, oh, I'm not scared, you know? Sometimes in a movie where if it's boring, all you're waiting for is to get scared, and I think a lot of people, especially with horror, expect a lot of jump scares and expect to be really, like, shocked a lot of the time, or maybe they expect more disturbing stuff. I mean, this movie doesn't really do either. Again, it's just really trying to have a good time, so it's not really concerned with scaring you as much. And look, this movie is definitely leaning a lot more heavily into the comedy than the horror, which is kind of what I was getting at. Similar to Happy Death Day, it's actually even more comedic than I expected from the trailer, with jokes in nearly every scene of the movie. It's really a lot of comedy, and I actually did find most of it to be pretty funny. Some might be a bit turned off by that, especially if you went into this for a true slasher movie. Like, if you went into this for just total horror, total slasher bloodiness, and all that stuff, again, maybe you'll be a little disappointed by how much comedy. So, like, I think you really have to be the right demographic for this movie. If you're going for the scares, know that it's more comedy. If you're going for the comedy, know that it's also a bloody movie. But again, it's more in the same category as something like Scream, just not as intense. And if that sounds good to you, you'll have a lot of fun, I'm sure. I mean, I personally, I think I was just in the right demographic for this movie because I had a great time watching it, and I was so entertained. I think my only real issue with the film, besides some jokes that maybe cut the tension a few times, and maybe a few jokes that didn't really work, I think there was a bridge between the second and third act that made the pacing come to a halt for a few minutes. Like, it was a very fast-paced movie for a lot of it. I mean, the first two-thirds went by super quickly, and then right before it sort of, went to the last, section of the movie, I felt where is this going? Like, it feels like it's almost, wrapping up. Like, where's it going? And then it quickly gained the excitement back, but there was a short period of time where it felt like nothing was really happening, and I was just kind of, waiting for what would happen next. And also, even though I did like the third act, I think it was pretty well done. I don't think it's quite as strong as the first two-thirds. I think really those first two-thirds were quite good. The last third didn't get me quite as much, but I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was a good ending to the movie. But look, even if this movie isn't as smart or clever as something like Companion, I think it's in a different sort of category of its own, and I would say it's probably the most purely entertaining movie of the year so far. If I said Companion is the best movie of the year so far, probably the best made movie, I would say Hard Eyes is just the most entertaining and good time. And look, it's still early in the year, it's only 2 months in, but I could see myself rewatching this movie for years to come. Like every February or every few Februarys, I might just pop this movie on and see it again. It's really that much fun, and it's not going to be for everyone. I think you really have to be in that certain, category of people to like it as much as I did, but I just thought it was a really fun time, and I would recommend it. I'm going to give this movie a B+, and realistically, it's more of a B when looking at it as a film and really judging it from that perspective, but I just had such a good time watching it that my entertainment value honestly pushes it up a grade. I just really enjoyed it. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.